Osteoporosis. No cracking up, please. And that's what it is. You start cracking up. The NIH has a definition for us. Osteoporosis is a skeletal disorder characterized by compromised bone strength leading to increased risk of fracture. What's all that mean? Your bones get thin, and then pretty soon they start breaking. And that's no fun. Lots of fractures occur. Here are 2 slides of bone. This is normal bone over here. You can see there's lots of calcium, a lot of trabecula, a lot of white there. Only small holes where cells and fat would be. Over here we have osteoporotic bone. Osteo meaning bone, porotic meaning holes or holes in bone. And like there's a very big hole. You see, each of these little trabecula are there to give the bone strength. When those trabecula disappear, the bone loses strength. It's sort of like these suspension bridges. How many of these girders would you be willing to have missing and still drive across the bridge? How about if the bridge was in Minnesota? Remember the big bridge that fell down out of the Twin Cities about a year ago? And so we know we need trabecula just like we need all these girders for the bridge. Now, there's about 10 million Americans who have osteoporosis, and another 34 million who have osteopenia, meaning the bone is thin but not quite to the level of being osteoporosis. And notice that it affects 80% women, 20% men. So this is largely a women's disease. Although I've met a number of men and have a number of patients who had osteoporosis. So it affects both. A lot of fractures occur each year. 1.5 million osteoporotic fractures per year. That's 300,000 hip fractures. 700,000 vertebral fractures and wrist fractures and other fractures to make up the difference. Now here's a little graph I want you to read. Across the bottom we have age. Up the side we have the incidence of fractures. And this is going to be in women. Now, at what age do wrist fractures start to increase? 50. And what's happening in a woman's life around age 50? Menopause. Some of you said that with a great deal more conviction than the rest of you. Menopause. And menopause especially affects the wrist. Then here are hip fractures. At what age do hip fractures start to increase? Yes, and what's happening at that age in a woman's life? Well, it used to be Social Security. Retirement, that's right. We quit working, we sit down. Hey, I earned it. I'm going to sit down and take it easy, and if you don't use it, you lose it. You don't exercise those bones, and they don't get strong. Vertebral fractures benefit from both processes, both menopause and retirement. Now, here is a picture of the spine in somebody with osteoporosis. Can you see the spine there? Well, with a little imagination there, yeah, look very close and, well, let's see, I can barely make out the spine. Sometimes we take a picture of somebody's spine and there's more calcium in the blood vessels, the aorta, than there is in the backbone because they have both osteoporosis and atherosclerosis. So it's a big problem. And as these bones get thinner and thinner, just like those bridges falling, the back starts to crunch down. As it crunches down, things happen. You get more and more pain. We call the result kyphosis. You probably call it hunchback. And you start having to look up to people you thought you'd never have to look up to. And then you start getting more and more pain because the back is crunching, the bones hurt. Not only do the bones hurt, it takes more muscle strength to try to pull you up straight, and that's always getting those muscles tight and hurting. And then the abdomen starts bulging, and not only is that not quite the aesthetic appearance you wanted to present yourself with to everybody, but that's a loss of space for the food to go anywhere, and so you start getting reflux. And then your lungs start getting cramped, and then you can't breathe very well. And that's all depressing. and you get depressed. Hip fractures, what a disaster. Once you've broken your hip, you cannot walk around. You're stuck. You end up in a hospital. 35% of postmenopausal white women have osteoporosis of the hip, spine, or wrist. Is it getting better? No, by the year 2020, we figure half of Americans over the age of 50 will have serious osteoporosis of the hip. But I thought we had the best medical care in the world. We need it because we're not taking care of ourselves. So let's look at hip fractures on a map. Notice that the darker the color, the greater the incidence of hip fractures. Now, where do you see the darkest color on the map? Texas. Well, what's happening out there? Can you think of a famous talk show host that spent a number of years of her life in that part of Texas, albeit against her will? Oprah, that's right. She had on her show a gentleman who calls himself the Mad Cowboy, Howard Lyman. At one point during the show, he piped up to say that they're feeding dead cattle back to live cattle that are going to end up in human food. And Oprah said something to the effect, well, if that's the case, I'm never having another hamburger in my life. And a bunch of her viewers said, yeah, and me either. And it made such an impact in the finances of the cattlemen, they took her to court. All to illustrate what they're eating over there. Hip fractures are expensive. In 2002, it took up $18 billion. By the year 2050, we figure it'll take $131 billion, if we're still using dollars by that time. And here's the real kicker, up to 1/3 of patients die within a year of breaking their hip. Dead. Why? Oh, the bone doesn't poke them or anything, but the bones are sort of a barometer for the health of the whole body. Oh, they die of blood clots and heart attacks and congestive heart failure and strokes and all kinds of other things, but it's partly because of the condition of their whole body. Also, they're laying around an awful lot after the fracture. Now, here's a DEXA scan report. A DEXA scan is the easy way to find out your level of density of your bones, rather than falling down and breaking one of them. And the DEXA scan will give you a report. It scans the spine, it scans the hips, and it comes up with this report that's sort of a statistical thing, T-score, and each one of these lines represents a standard deviation. The middle line here is normal. This person got a fairly normal T-score, very close to 0. But for each line down is a standard deviation, and when you get down to 2 1/2 standard deviations, or a T-score of -2.5, you have osteoporosis. 1.5 to 2.5 would be osteopenia. Well, what's the significance of a really bad T-score? Maybe I had -4. What would that mean? Well, for each standard deviation of bone loss below the mean, there is a 40% higher risk of dying of a hip fracture. I had a little old lady come in from the nursing home, and she couldn't decide if she fell first, and that's why she broke her hip when she hit the floor, or if the hip actually broke first, and that's why she fell, and her bone was just as soft as butter. She's at very high risk of dying of a hip fracture. 1/4 of hip fracture patients become disabled the following year, meaning they never get back to work again. They're permanently off work. 2/3 never get back to the same level of activity. Can't take care of themselves often. 1/5 require long-term nursing home care. Means that's where they go to live now. And there's been like 140,000 nursing home admissions per year due to hip fractures. 68% worry that another fracture would put them in a nursing home. 73% are concerned that they will have to reduce activity with family or friends. Oh, why don't you all just go on out without me? I'm so slow and I might fall down again. Isolation, loneliness. And 89% fear breaking another bone, and within 5 years, most do. What I'm telling you is osteoporosis is not good. You don't want it. And it's actually more deadly than perhaps some of the other diseases we talk about. So, why do we get it? And by correlation, if we know why we get it, what can we do to avoid it or even fix it? So let's look at the causes of primary osteoporosis. First of all, what's this lady doing? Sunshine. And what's the sunshine for? Yes, vitamin D, but did you know that vitamin K, vitamin B12, and B6 are just as important for your bones? We don't talk about them a lot. Where do you get vitamin K? Green leafy vegetables. Iceberg lettuce actually has quite a bit. And you need certain minerals, such as magnesium, copper, and boron, as well as your calcium, to keep away from osteoporosis. What's this gentleman doing? Smoking. And when you smoke, it poisons the little cells. Especially if you smoke when you're young, then you're more likely to have thin bones. It messes with all your hormones, thyroid, adrenal, testicular, ovarian, as well as calcium metabolism. This stuff's very dangerous. What's this lady drinking? Yeah, some kind of alcoholic beverage. And alcohol also poisons all the little cells. Drinking, particularly during adolescence and young adulthood, when you're trying to build your bones, will compromise your bone quality for life, increasing your risk of falling and breaking a bone. Now, what's she drinking there? Coffee. And what's the main thing in coffee we worry about? Caffeine. Caffeine increases the urinary excretion of calcium. More calcium in your urine for about 3 hours. And then it's time for another cup of coffee, right? And so this keeps the drain going. And caffeine decreases bone-preserving testosterone. And you don't want to lose your testosterone. What's this? Salt. Well, I'm just picking on all the good stuff. Well, that's what does it. Did you think I was going to talk about this? What's the popular thing they say causes osteoporosis? A deficiency of Fosamax, of course. All right, milk? Not enough milk? All right. Salt. What does salt do? Well, you see, salt is a positive ion, at least the sodium is, and calcium is a positive ion. They fight in the kidney. Guess who loses? Calcium loses. Down the drain goes the calcium. The sodium gets retained along with a lot of fluid, and you end up getting swelling in your ankles or something. What's this? Sugar? Well, what's sugar got to do with osteoporosis? Well, 16 teaspoons of sugar increases the urinary excretion of calcium by 124%. So urologists studying this, they want to figure out why people are getting kidney stones. Where's all the calcium coming from? And sure enough. And then you add chocolate to it. Oh, I'm going to become very unpopular tonight, I can see. Add chocolate to it, and it increases the amount of calcium in the urine by 150%, 147%. So, sugar and chocolate are high on the list. What about cholesterol? Dietary cholesterol increases oxidative stress, the inflammation in your body. The inflammation causes bone resorption. I mean, this is what happens with rheumatoid arthritis patients. What's this lady drinking? What kind of soda? Yeah, the dark brown sodas. And what do dark brown sodas have? Well, it may not be obvious unless you've read the ingredients. But yes, phosphoric acid. They have an acid that as soon as you drink that Coke, you can start seeing calcium come out in your urine. It makes the whole body acid. And if your whole body gets acid, well, what do you do if your stomach gets acid? Take a Tums. What is a Tums? What's it made out of? Calcium. Yeah, basic. It's an acid, but the main source is calcium carbonate usually. Well, if you take Tums for an acid stomach, then you can kind of figure that the body, when you get too acid, is going to take calcium to solve the problem too. And it takes the calcium from the bones in order to buffer the acid to get it out in your urine. So you end up losing a lot of calcium. What are these guys? What kind of cows? Beef cows. Sandwich fillers, huh? Animal protein. Animal protein, unlike vegetable protein, has more of the amino acids with phosphorus and sulfur. And when you have more phosphorus and sulfur, you make more sulfuric acid and phosphoric acid. And again, it takes calcium from your bones to buffer all that extra acid produced by these sources of phosphorus and sulfur. What's he eating? Pizza? Well, what's pizza got in it that'll give you trouble? Salt? Cheese? Fat? Yeah? A diet which makes your blood more acid increases urinary calcium loss. Things that are especially good at making your acid in your blood are grains, potatoes, animal products. Cheese is the very worst. To look at this on a scale, notice that fruits and vegetables make you alkali, but grains, fish, meats, and cheeses make you very acid. Net organic acid load. And so this will take away the calcium out of your bones. So if you're trying to get over osteoporosis, I say avoid these and eat a lot of these. Lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. Okay, let's talk about this guy. What do you think he's been up to? He just got off of his computer trying to make money on the stock market. Well, no, I don't know that for sure, but I'm guessing. And chronic stress, huh? Always at the very end. You know, there's this, we call the stress curve. A little bit of stress makes you get a lot done. Too much stress burns you out. This guy's way burned out. And so elevated stress, like cortisol, the stress hormone, causes osteoporosis. You take artificial cortisol, prednisone, you'll get osteoporosis as well. What do you call this guy? Wow, is he one of your relatives? I mean, everybody seems to know who he is. And he's got his remote there. Or he's got a remote too. Inactivity, doing nothing. If you don't use it, you lose it. And that's exactly what happens. It affects men just as much as women. Does she look happy? Oh, depressed. Oh, depressed. Risk of hip fracture increases 90% with depression. And increases your risk of falling by 40%. So depression. Hey, that reminds me of a famous Bible text. A merry heart doth good like a medicine. Oh, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. Suppose Solomon knew something about osteoporosis? Apparently. All right, there's other things that'll do it to you, but we're not going to go into those. Your medicines are between you and your doctor, and all those other conditions you got. We're talking about some of those in other lectures, but we're talking about primary causes. Now, your bones are biologically active. They're always remodeling. They're always growing. I mean, they're always changing. Always under construction, just like the roads around Alabama, huh? And by the time you're 25, bone has reached maturity. Won't grow anymore, won't get longer. By 35, it's reached a peak bone mass. By 40, starting to go over the hill, starting to lose bone at 0.5% per year. By 45, during those perimenopausal years, bone loss can be as high as 3% per year. And if that continued for 10 years, you could lose 30% of your skeleton. Yes. So let's talk about calcium in the bones. The bones are basically your calcium bank. Oh, maybe I shouldn't be talking about banks. Banks aren't doing too well these days, are they? Well, they are the bank. Okay. 99% of your calcium's in the bones. There's about less than 1% actually in the blood. Well, how do I make deposits? How do I make withdrawals? Well, the way you make withdrawals, your body makes withdrawals, is through a cell called osteoclasts. They come along and take up old bone. This is like the road crew out here that comes along and takes up the old pavement. And then they leave a rough surface behind. They put up a sign, motorcyclists, look out, there's grooved pavement. You know what I'm talking about. Then along comes another set of cells, the osteoblasts, and they make deposits. See the depositing there. Now, how thick is the pavement down here on I-24? Oh, probably a foot thick, huh? Yeah, real thick. How thick is the pavement in your driveway? Not to bring up any disputes with your contractor, but sometimes it's pretty thin. That's because you're not going to have any semis coming in your driveway very often. But out in the big freeway, they're going to have lots of semis going down the freeway. They want the pavement to match the demands. Same is true of your cells in your bones. It only lays down as much calcium as the amount of work you give the bones suggests you need. And so you exercise and it builds up more calcium in the bones. Well, how much calcium do we need? Well, you know who sets up the USRDA? It's the National Academy of Sciences. They say you need 1,000 milligrams for a middle-aged person. I mean, if you're pregnant, it's 1,300. If you're getting really old, it's 1,400. I mean, they have different amounts for different age groups, but for a middle-aged person, 1,000 milligrams. Well, along came the National Institute of Health. They said 1,000. Well, wait. Osteoporosis is epidemic. We need more. How about 1,500 milligrams? Oh, should I take more just to be sure? Along came World Health Organization. They said, oh, come on. Osteoporosis rarely found in our 6 billion people on Earth, or 6.6 billion. That's very rare. You only need 500 milligrams. Who's right? Who shall we blame? Should we take extra just to be sure? Well, you take extra calcium, it increases your risk of coronary artery disease. That calcium finds a place to land. That's one of the places. Studies of women who take extra calcium show they get more coronary artery disease. So don't just take extra. And interestingly enough, they're finding that probably the reason why calcium is helpful at all is because it is an antacid. And people are eating so many acid-forming foods that they need an antacid just to counteract that. It really has little or nothing to do with the fact that it is calcium. All right, let's look at calcium balance in the body. So you eat some calcium in your diet, 1,000 milligrams, let's say. And then it goes in your stomach, gets in your intestine, it gets absorbed, some of it, and it goes into your blood. And then some of it goes to your bones, and some of it comes back out of the bones, and some of it gets excreted in the stool, some of it goes out in the urine. That's the balance. Now, wouldn't you like to know how to make money on the stock market? They say if you could be right 51% of the time on the stock market, you can make money. You'd do well. So we need to know where we can put our money in the balance and make the most difference more than 50% of the time, right? Okay, well, we got 3 places we can affect: diet, stool, and urine. Now let me just tell you up front that what you eat in the way of calcium only makes about a 10% difference. So if you can only be right 10% of the time on the stock market, it's going to be awfully hard to make money. So let's not waste a lot of time worrying about that one. But let me tell you where you can make the biggest difference, and that is in the urine. You can make a difference. You have more than 50% control over your entire calcium balance by how you affect the urine. So let's look at the urine and let's just see what we can do here. Urinary calcium and calcium balance, diet with protein, urine calcium and calcium balance. All right, let's start off with a low protein diet, 47 grams per day. And let's look at the urinary calcium in this study. It ended up being 168. And at the end of the day, all losses and incomes considered, there was a positive 31 milligrams a day calcium balance. That means every day they increased by 31 milligrams of calcium. Well, that's pretty good. If I could put $31 in the bank every day, net, after all expenses, boy, I could retire, huh? That'd be pretty good. All right, but then they doubled the protein. All of a sudden, the urinary calcium went up to 240, and the calcium balance went down the drain. Negative 58. If I lost $58 a day, will Social Security keep up with that? Probably not. So we're in trouble. Triple the protein, and now we're way in the hole. And so you can see there's a problem here. Well, where's that calcium coming from? Did it all come from the bones? Let's find out. Let's change the equation. This time, instead of looking at balance, let's look at a little protein called N-telopeptide that's in the bones along with the calcium. So anytime calcium ends up in the urine and N-telopeptide, we know the calcium came from no other place than from the bones. All right, start over with low protein diet. In this study, they got 108 milligrams of calcium out in the urine. Since in the last study that was a positive balance, I'm going to call that baseline. Let's increase the protein again, not double it this time. Let's just raise it by 70, up to 70, excuse me. Just a little bit. Then the urinary calcium went up to 129, and the N-telopeptide jumped to 33%, by 33%. Well, the message? When we find extra calcium in the urine after participating in bad lifestyle habits, that calcium came from no other place than from the bones. Goodbye, bones. All right, well, maybe I'll just eat more calcium then. Let's see what happens if I eat more calcium. Maybe if I ate enough calcium, I could solve the problem. Okay, let's start with low protein, double it, triple it again, and let's eat 1,400 milligrams of calcium every day. Can we stop it with 1,400 milligrams of calcium? Here, when we're on the low protein diet, in this study, they had a positive calcium balance of 20 when they got 1,400 milligrams of calcium. When we double the protein, all of a sudden we go in the hole by 30. Triple it, and we're down by negative 70. The message? You cannot eat enough calcium to offset the effect of bad lifestyle habits on the health of your bones. It will continue to lose calcium. Pills, in this case, are not the answer. Well, let's just follow this over time. Let's say we did get 1,400 milligrams of calcium in our diet, in our urine, because we're on high protein. We lost 196. In the stool, we have 1244. In the sweat, 10. At the end of the day, all intakes and losses considered, we're at negative 50. That's one day. One day. Okay. But that's not the only day in our life. We're going to live a year. We're going to live 20 years. And so over 20 years, at 50 milligrams a day, we could lose 365 grams of calcium. Well, how much did I start with? Well, the average woman starts with 821. That's a 44% loss of the skeleton in 20 years. That's a lot of loss. That's a lot of calcium down the drain. Well, so that begs an important question. How much protein should I get? How much protein do I need? How much protein is good for me? What's the best source of protein? Well, that question has been entertained by a number of individuals over time. Karl Voigt was one of the most famous ones back in his day in the 1800s in Germany. He decided to look at people groups and decide who had the best diet. He decided that the rich people in the castles up on the hills who had lots of money and were smart and hardworking, their diet must be best. He watched what they ate. They ate about 118 grams of protein per day, and so he said, you want to be rich, you want to be smart, you want to be hardworking, you better get 118 grams of protein per day. Became known as Voigt's standard. Okay, all right, Voigt's standard. So people tried to do that. It was a lot of work. You have to eat a lot of high protein items, and that usually ended up being, animals. Along came Russell Henry Chittenden. He said, oh, wait. Those people didn't get wealthy by eating that kind of protein. In fact, they could not afford that kind of protein until they got wealthy. So this makes no sense at all. He says, cut it in half. Let's reduce it to 60. Well, okay. People said, oh, that's easier. Okay, so they switched to 60. Then came World War I. And Denmark was closed off from the rest of the world. You know who Denmark's closest neighbors are by land? Germany. The Germans weren't very friendly. And the Germans had their U-boats out in the water around the peninsula there, and so they ended up being isolated. They couldn't import anything. No grain to feed their cattle or to make beer out of. They couldn't raised many animal products. They ended up on a forced diet. They ate a lot of rye bread that was high fiber. They ate a lot of potatoes, vegetables, and fruits. Little or no coffee, tea, alcohol, butter, margarine, or anything like that. And the death rate in Denmark fell to the lowest it had ever fallen in any civilized country in the history of civilization. 10.4 per 1,000. People were living long. During this same time in the United States, we had the Spanish influenza going around. Our average longevity fell by 15 years, both 1918 and 1919. Denmark experienced none of that, being on a vegetarian diet. Dr. Hennedy looked at this. He said, well, this is interesting. He put himself on a low-protein diet, 40 grams. He did well, and so he published in 1920 how important it was to be on a low-protein diet. He said in their guidelines in Denmark for diet, they didn't even consider protein as being an important thing to put in the guidelines. They didn't make people get a certain amount, and they did fine. Very interesting. Well, still not real scientific, good epidemiology compared to the last two guys, but along came William C. Rose, a PhD laboratory gentleman who figured out the last of the 8 essential amino acids. He determined the amount of each one you needed based on nitrogen balance and other symptoms in human beings. He published that you needed a certain amount of each one of these essential amino acids, and he added them all up. Guess how much protein Dr. Rose says a mature adult needs? 15, 20. Actually, 12.7. 12.7 grams. Whoa, that's awfully low. 12.7, has anybody done that? That's actually twice the amount below which people were getting symptoms of deficiency. He just doubled it to make sure that you'd have enough. 12.7. Well, who's done that? Well, there's some people come close. The Bantus, people who live in Somalia. Bantu women get 10% of their diet in protein, 350 milligrams of calcium. They have lots of children. No calcium deficiency. Strong bones and teeth, and no hip fractures. Interesting. In Burma, same thing, only they get about 198 milligrams of calcium a day. Low protein. So on the other hand, we have the Eskimos. They're very physically active, chasing all kinds of animals up there. They get lots of calcium in their diet, as much as 2,500 milligrams, but they have the worst osteoporosis in the world. Why? Their daily protein intake is 250 to 400 grams. Fish. All kinds of things. Well, what is the USRDA? Well, the USRDA is based on, how much you weigh, but for the average man, it's about 56 grams. For the average female, it's 44 grams. But did you know that the RDA is actually about double what is the amount if you went below, you'd be deficient? There is a minimal daily requirement that the World Health Organization talks about, and they figure for a male, 30 grams is sufficient, and for a female, 25. So, that would probably be a better thing to shoot for, especially if you have osteoporosis. Now let's talk about these 8 essential amino acids as Dr. Rose described them. Notice there's different height of bars here for each one. Isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, and so forth and so on. These are the 8 essential amino acids that you need. Well, okay. Where am I going to find those? I mean, this is going to be a big hassle checking what my food has, or where am I going to find these? 8 of them. How do I know it? Well, let's look at a chart. Look at that. Broccoli. If you ate nothing but broccoli, you'd get more than enough protein. Asparagus, white beans, rolled oats, corn. Look at that. Whole wheat flour. Pumpkin? That's a fruit, isn't it? Tomatoes. I had a friend who was trying to get her dietitian's license. She was taking night school. One of the assignments was to go to the grocery store during the day and go around and look at labels and put together a low-protein diet. She walked up and down and back and forth, writing things down, looking at stuff, and at the end of the morning, she was unable to put together a low-protein diet. It's hard. Protein's hard to avoid. So it's a big myth that you'll be low in protein. Oh, and by the way, how about breast milk? Breast milk has 1/3 the protein of cow's milk. 1 cup of breast milk, 2.6 grams. 1 cup of cow's milk, 8. You suppose we are not really baby cows? Oh, but I drink the cow's milk for the protein. Oh, if you want lots of protein, rat's milk has about 10 times as much protein as breast milk. So, yeah. All right. Now, why the difference? Why such high protein for the cow? Well, cows don't nurse that long, maybe 3-4 months. And they're trying to make a little calf to a very big calf in a very short amount of time. All brawn and no brain. That's right. On the other hand, human breast milk has other things in it besides protein that are good for a baby's brain. So the baby will grow smart as well as strong. Well, let's look at different diets and see how they vary according to Rosa's standard. Here's Rosa's standard. We're going to look at how much different they are. First of all, a pure vegetarian diet varies in amino acid composition from Rosa's standard by 28%. On the other hand, a non-vegetarian diet varies by 48%. Means you're going to have to eat a lot more of this protein from this source just to get your essential amino acids. It's not as good a source of protein. Oh, but who says Rosa's right? Let's look at human breast milk again. A pure vegetarian diet varies in amino acid composition from breast milk by only 13%. And a meat diet by 22%. So, vegetable protein is a higher quality of protein. It takes less of it to get your essential amino acids. Now here's a very important chart. I want you to look very closely at this one because this one's very important to tell you the contribution of animal protein to osteoporosis and hip fractures. Remember we talked about the Africans, they get very little animal protein and they have very few hip fractures. United States though, we get a lot of animal protein and as a consequence, we have a lot more hip fractures. More people go in the nursing home, more people needing crutches, walkers, wheelchairs. If you're in the durable medical equipment industry, that's good. But if you're trying to take care of your bones, that's bad. England fits right in there. You know, we can draw a line through these, but notice all the countries line up here. The more animal protein the country consumes, the more hip fractures they can expect. Animal protein does... Oh, wait, what kind of animal protein? Any source. Milk, eggs, meat, you name it, animal protein. Well, where am I going to get my protein then? Well, let's look at a few things. We showed our chart earlier, but let's just look at some common foods. Beans, 1 cup, 12 grams. I guess Dr. Rose would get by on a cup of beans a day. Whole wheat bread, 2 slices, 5 grams. Soy milk, 1 cup, 7 grams. I've seen as high as 10 or 12 in some soy milks, like Eden soy. Potatoes, 2 of them, 15 grams. Brown rice, 1 cup, 6 grams. It's hard to avoid protein. Now, what's the effect of getting too much animal protein in my diet? Well, one of the things is you will have progressive kidney failure. I was out at some continuing medical education in California last year, and a research nephrologist came in and told about his research. He was feeding people a diet, and then he added animal protein. Their kidneys shut down by 40% instantly. 40% down. Creatinine clearance down by 40%. Then, as he watched them over time, it kept dropping. Irrecoverable losses of the kidneys, nephrons being burnt out. Then he switched them to a soy protein diet, and they started picking back up. The 40% went away right away, and they started improving. Animal protein starts shutting down your kidneys almost instantly. Kidney stones, ouch. Gouty arthritis. Used to be only kings got this. You'd see them sitting there with their foot on a pillow, and some servant fanning their big toe because the big toe is all inflamed. Now everybody gets to enjoy this imperial disease. Increased tumor growth, elevated cholesterol. Animal protein makes your cholesterol go up even if there's no cholesterol with the animal protein. It tells your liver to pump out more. And we've been talking about the calcium loss in the urine. Let's just review this whole business of the difference in the protein. See, animal protein has a lot more phosphate and sulfur. That's the big issue. If you look at a diet, the American diet, and you look where the phosphorus is coming from, this is it. So in an American's diet, 1/3 of the phosphorus, which ends up making phosphoric acid, comes from dairy products. Did you know countries that drink more dairy have more osteoporosis? Milk is so high in protein that only 30% of the calcium in it gets absorbed at all. And because it's so high in phosphorus, it takes more than that 30% of calcium to buffer the acid and get it out of the system. And so, yeah, but they told me to have my mustache. But anyway, dairy products aren't helpful, at least in this area. Okay, meat products supply 1/4 of the phosphorus. Grain products, remember we said grain product can be acid forming? There's why. Lots of phosphorus. And then notice these are fairly low. Oh, eggs, finally something I can eat. Well, this is phosphorus. If we're looking at a sulfur chart, eggs would be the big one. Eggs have 16 times more sulfur than soy protein. 16 times. If you need sulfur, that's great. If you don't, it can cause osteoporosis. So when these phosphates and sulfur are broken down, they form sulfuric acid and phosphoric acid. Calcium is then taken from the bones to buffer these acids. But there's another factor. Protein is broken down to urea. We used to use urea in the hospital as a diuretic. So not only are you losing more calcium, your body is being made to pee it out a lot faster. So this is a problem. And what about milk? Let's talk about milk in the studies. Notice the difference between drinking 1 glass per week and 1 glass per day, essentially. Drinking 1 glass per day increases your risk of hip fracture by 45%. What's more, dairy product consumptions during your 20s when you're trying to build your bones increases the risk of hip fracture later in life by 240%. Milk is not helpful. When I decided to become a vegan, my grandmother, who used to have her own dairy farm, really was upset. Oh, your teeth are going to rot and your bones aren't going to grow. We had some social distress for a while. All right, but there are good proteins. One of those proteins is soy. They've studied soy, they've studied tofu and soy milk. They've also studied some of the constituent proteins in soy, one of which is genistein. Genistein will actually increase bone mineral density by 6% in 2 years. Hey, that's not bad. How's that compare to the drugs? Well, if you take that calcitonin stuff, you squirt up your nose, you'd be lucky to get a 3% increase in 10 years. Fosamax, you might get 7% in 10 years, but then your teeth might fall out because they'll make your jaw disappear. Osteonecrosis of the jaw. Forteo, injectable parathyroid hormone, you might get 13% in 2 years, but if you took it longer than 2 years, your risk of bone cancer goes up so high they say, oh, stop, can't take any more. So it's sort of dangerous. But 6% in 2 years off of and if you just eat the tofu and soy milk, you can get about 3% in 2 years. So there's benefits to soy protein. At least it doesn't have all that sulfur and phosphoric acid. Where am I going to get my calcium then? Well, dandelion greens. Just look out in your lawn. Before long, you'll be having plenty. And pick them young and green. As they get older, they get bitter. Let's see, baked beans, pretty good. Sesame seeds, 2 tablespoons. Look at that. That's pretty good. That's with the hull. You can get the 2 different kinds. You get them whole or unhulled. The unhulled ones have the calcium. The calcium's largely in the hull. Blackstrap molasses, kale, turnip greens. Green soybeans, edamame, huh? 261. There you get your protein and your calcium. Here's whole milk, and I put the milk up here so you can see. It's about 300 in a cup of milk. But again, it's so high in protein, only 30% of that gets absorbed, so that's 90 milligrams, and then most of that has to go to buffer out all that phosphorus. Lamb's quarters, is that some kind of mutton? It's a grain, it's a weed, isn't it? What do they call it, ragweed or pigweed? And huh? Yeah, lamb's quarters is what we call it, but the farmers call it something else. And I like it better than spinach myself. I boil it or eat it raw. I put lemon juice on it and salt, and very good stuff. I mean, it grows beside the roads as we travel across America. Wonderful weed. And what about calcium deficiency? World Health Organization doesn't think there's any such thing. No frank signs of calcium deficiency have ever been described in any part of the world, even in populations with habitually low calcium intake. No calcium deficiency. Well, but I'll just take my estrogen pills. I've got it all under control. My doctor says I won't lose my bones. Well, in the long run, it doesn't work. And you might get a hole in your bone from a wandering uterine cancer, breast cancer. You get gallbladder disease, blood clots, and high blood pressure. Your cholesterol goes way up. So that's not the good solution. What's the best solution? Exercise. Let's look at a study here. How much bone did we say a perimenopausal woman lost per year? 3%. Yes, and if that continued for 10 years, you could lose 30% of your skeleton. So 3% per year in 26 months, how much do you think the non-exercisers will lose? Yeah, 6.6. So 6.5%. Very good. Now, on the other hand, they had a bunch of exercisers. The exercise included walking and some step aerobics, 30 minutes a day. They totally cut their losses and actually gained a little bit. So this is the huge important thing. Getting exercise. Don't sit down and do nothing. Another study. Low exercise, high exercise. Those that exercise the most saw a 55% reduction in hip fracture rate. It makes a difference in your hip fractures. And how about vitamin D? This is a study in northern Maine, way up north, where they took some fairly old people, 84 years old, and in a year and a half you can expect the placebo group, for which they did nothing, to lose, 4.5% of their skeleton. Notice, though, that those who took the vitamin D saw their bone density increase by 2.7%, and their number of hip fractures decreased by 43%. So vitamin D can be helpful. Now notice they used 800 international units per day. Recommendations have been going up on that. If you knew what your vitamin D level was, you can figure that for every 1,000 international units of vitamin D you take, your vitamin D level can go up about 10 points. So if your vitamin D level comes out 10 on your test, your 25-hydroxy vitamin D, and you want it to be 60 really, then you know you need 5,000 units of vitamin D per day to try to get it there. That's a lot of pills to take, isn't it? It is. There's an easier way to get it. You get out in the sun in the summer for a half hour, you'll get about 10,000 units of vitamin D. So the sun is definitely the best way to get it. And since vitamin D, your source of vitamin D isn't really dietary, taking it through the diet has some drawbacks, but anyway, so does breaking your bones. All right, banking on your bones, the bank. Let's talk about our different things and put them in a summary. First of all, weight-bearing exercises. That is hugely important. If you don't use it, you lose it. All right, and then reduce protein and grain consumption, particularly refined grains, particularly animal protein. Choose to abandon the calcium thieves. We've talked about animal protein. What's the matter with the Coke? Yes, sugar, phosphoric acid, and caffeine. All three. What's the matter with him? He's looking down. Stress, depression maybe. Here we have corn chips. What's the matter with corn chips? Oil, salt, fat. There's cheese on them, it looks like. So it's going to be a problem there. And, lots of grains. All right, what's in the cup? And what's the matter with coffee? Caffeine. Oh, but I'll just drink decaf. Does that help? Studies show it makes no difference because there's so many acid-forming oils in coffee that and when you decaf it, it brings those oils out. That decaf will do the same thing to you. Can't win, huh? No smoking. What do you call this? What kind of cake is that? It's not a birthday cake, is it? It's an osteoporosis cake. And here's our alcohol, poisons the little cells. Does she look like an exerciser? No, not an exerciser. Okay, sunlight. How much do we need? 20 minutes of sun over 25% of your body on 7 days of a week. That's the recommendation by Dr. Michael Holick, who's sort of the world's expert on vitamin D. What's 25% of my skin anyway? Well, your trunk is about 18%, front of your legs is about 9%, front of your arms is about 4%, so just get the whole front of you into the sun, and if you want to do it especially good, get out on a trampoline and jump up and down in the sun. Now, the lower the sun gets in the sky, the less vitamin D you get. In fact, if your shadow is longer than you are tall, you get no vitamin D. But when your shadow gets shorter, then the 300 nanometer wavelength UVB light that needs to cause your cholesterol to turn to vitamin D in your skin can make it over the horizon and get you your necessary vitamin D. So if your shadow is longer than you are tall, no vitamin D. And eat a plant-based diet rich in naturally occurring calcium. There you go. Well, what are we talking about? Well, plant-based diet. More plant-based diet, the better. Oh, what kind of diet's that? That's the original diet, isn't it? Back to Eden. In the beginning, Genesis, here I put it in King James, a little harder to read, but, and God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables, huh? And does it work? It sure does. If you increase the number of servings of fruits and vegetables from 4 to 10 per day, then you decrease the amount of calcium lost in your urine by 30%. Just upping the number of servings of fruits and vegetables. And did you know some of the biggest animals that ever walked the earth were vegetarians? Hippopotamus, elephant, rhinoceros, dinosaurs. How many want to avoid osteoporosis or get over it? A few of you. Yes. All right. With all the spine fractures, pain and deformity and disability, wrist fractures with arthritis and fear of falling, hip fractures with nursing home confinement and death. On the other hand, get lots of sunlight, exercise on your feet, and eat more fruits and vegetables. How many want to do that? Simple enough, huh? All right. And if you want, carry a big something on your head to load your spine. Well, here's a promise for you. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. You'll be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. What a promise, huh?